Hey, welcome to our explainer. Today, we're going on a really cool journey. We're going to start with the choices you make every day with your own money, and then zoom all the way out to see how that connects to the giant, buzzing machine of the global economy. So let's jump right in and connect some dots.
So it really all boils down to this one question. How does your personal budget, your decision to buy a coffee or save up for something big, somehow connect to these huge topics like international trade, inflation, and what the government is doing? I know, it sounds like a massive leap, right? But that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the two main ways economists look at the world. Then we'll zoom right into individual choices in markets. After that, we'll pull way back to see the big picture, check out the tools governments use to steer the economy, expand the global stage, and finally get into the really tough choices leaders have to make. To really get your head around economics, you've got to look at it through two different lenses. A great way to think about it is like having both a microscope and a telescope. You absolutely need both to get the whole story. So first up, you've got microeconomics. That's our microscope. It looks at all the individual pieces. You, your family, a single business making a decision. It's all about how each of us tries to make the best choices we can. And then there's macroeconomics. That's our telescope. It's all about looking at the entire forest, not just one or two trees. We're talking about the big stuff, like a whole country's growth, inflation, and unemployment rates. All right, let's grab that microscope and zoom in. Because at the heart of pretty much every economic thing that happens, there are these two basic forces at play, and you interact with them every single day, even if you don't realize it. And this right here, this is the heart of it. You have supply, that's all the stuff for sale, and you have demand, that's what people actually want to buy. And where those two lines cross, that's the sweet spot, the magic point called equilibrium. It's where the market decides on a price and figures out who gets what. That's the famous invisible hand everyone talks about, right there in action. But, that invisible hand, it can drop the ball sometimes. We call these market failures. Think about externalities, like a factory that pollutes a river. That's a side effect that nobody's paying for. Or public goods, like national defense. We all benefit, but who's going to pay for it individually? And sometimes it's just that one person in a deal knows way more than the other. Like buying a used car from someone who forgets to mention a big problem. And of course, the type of market makes a huge difference. You can have perfect competition. Think of a farmer's market with tons of people selling basically the same apples. At the other extreme, you've got a monopoly where just one company controls everything. And in between, you have markets with just a few big players, an oligopoly, or ones where lots of firms sell slightly different things to stand out. Okay, time to put down the microscope and pick up the telescope. Let's zoom out to that macro view. So how do we even know if a whole country's economy is healthy? Well, it turns out there are a few key numbers, kind of like a national report card, that everyone watches really, really closely. The biggest one, the headliner, is Gross Domestic Product, or GDP. Basically, it's the price tag for everything, and I mean everything, a country makes and sells in a year. Just by seeing if that number is going up or down, we get a pretty good idea if the economy is growing or shrinking. And when you track that GDP number over time, you start to see this pattern emerge, the business cycle. See, economies don't grow in a perfectly straight line. They have these natural waves, these ups and downs. The up periods are called expansions, and the down periods are recessions. GDP is what helps us see where we are in that cycle. Okay, next up is a big one we all feel in our wallets, inflation. It's just a way of saying that on average, prices are going up, which means the money you have buys you less stuff. It's usually measured with something called the Consumer Price Index, which tracks the cost of a typical shopping basket of goods over time. And here's the bottom line with inflation, the reason it matters so much. The dollar you have in your hand today is not going to buy the same amount of stuff tomorrow. It's like having a slow, invisible leak in your bank account. It just erodes the value of your hard-earned money. And the last of our big three indicators is the unemployment rate. This one's pretty straightforward. It's the percentage of people who want a job and are actively looking for one but can't find one. It's a really important signal about the health of the job market. So you see these cycles, these ups and downs, and you have to wonder, is anyone actually steering this ship? Can anything be done to smooth out the bumps? Well, the answer is kinda. Governments and central banks have a whole toolbox they can use to try and influence things. There are basically three main tools in their toolbox. You've got fiscal policy, which is all about government spending and taxes.
Then there's monetary policy, which is the central bank's job, controlling the money supply. And finally, especially in our connected world, you have exchange rate policy.
Let's start with fiscal policy. So let's say the economy's in a slump. The government can use an expansive policy. It might spend more on big projects or cut taxes to put more money in your pocket, hoping you'll spend it. On the flip side, if the economy is running too hot and prices are soaring, they can do the opposite, a contractive policy, by spending less and raising taxes to cool things down.
All right, then you've got monetary policy. This is the central bank's territory. Their main goal is to control the supply of money, which directly affects interest rates. If they want to boost the economy, they can lower interest rates to make it cheaper for people and businesses to borrow and spend. If they need to fight inflation, they'll raise interest rates to slow things down. It's a perpetual balancing act.
Now, we all know that in today's world, no economy is an island. So for our last big zoom out, let's go to the global stage, where countries are constantly trading, investing, and affecting one another.
So a huge piece of this global puzzle is how countries value their money against each other, the exchange rate. Some countries go for a fixed rate where they literally lock their currency's value to something stable, like the US dollar, to avoid wild swings. But many others let their currency float, where its value just goes up and down every day based on global supply and demand.
But of course, being this connected to the world has its risks. You can have a banking crisis that puts the whole financial system on the brink. You can have a currency crisis where a country's money suddenly becomes almost worthless. And sometimes you get the absolute worst-case scenario, a twin crisis where both happen at the same time.
And that brings us to our final section, and honestly, maybe the trickiest part of all. Because economics isn't just numbers and graphs in a textbook. It's about people, politics, and making some incredibly tough decisions that affect everyone's lives. Which leads to this huge question. Can a country really have it all? Can you actually get lots of jobs for everyone and keep prices from going crazy at the same time? Well, economic theory has some bad news. It's really, really hard. This is where we run into a classic economic idea called the Phillips curve. It basically shows that, at least in the short term, there's often a trade-off. If you use policy to lower unemployment and get the economy humming, you risk pushing inflation up. But if you focus on crushing inflation, you might slow the economy down and cost people their jobs. What this really means is that leaders are constantly stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so that leaves us with the million-dollar question, doesn't it? When every choice is a trade-off and there are no easy answers, what should we prioritize? Should we focus on growth at all costs, keeping prices stable, making sure things are fair? The answer to that isn't in a textbook. It's about what we, as a society, decide is most important.